The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, making Rachel Armstrong flinch as she clutched her medical bag closer to her chest. The year was 1879, and Rock Springs, Wyoming Territory, was living up to its reputation as one of the most dangerous settlements west of the Mississippi. She'd been in town less than a week, and this was already the third shooting she'd been summoned to attend. Rachel hurried along the dusty main street, her boots kicking up small clouds with each determined step. At 26, she was younger than most physicians, and being a woman doctor brought its own set of challenges. But after completing her training in Philadelphia, she'd felt called to go where medical care was most desperately needed. The frontier had no shortage of ailments or bullets. "Doc Armstrong, over here." Sheriff Mills waved frantically from the doorway of the Golden Spur Saloon. Rachel nodded grimly and quickened her pace. Inside, the usual cacophony of piano music, gambling, and drunken banter had been replaced by an uneasy silence. A crowd had formed a semicircle around a man lying on the floor, blood seeping through his shirt. "Make way for the doctor," Sheriff Mills commanded, and the onlookers reluctantly parted. Rachel knelt beside the wounded man, setting down her bag and rolling up her sleeves. "What happened here?" "Disagreement over cards," the sheriff replied. "Mr. Parker here got himself shot when he called out Dawson for cheating." The wounded man, Parker, was conscious but pale. His breathing came in shallow gasps, and his right shoulder was a mess of blood. "I need water, clean linens, and whiskey," Rachel instructed, not looking up as she cut away the man's shirt with small scissors from her bag. "And more light, if possible." The bullet had gone clean through, which was a blessing. Rachel worked efficiently, cleansing the wound, removing fragments of cloth, and eventually applying a tight bandage after stitching both the entry and exit wounds. "You'll live, Mr. Parker," she said finally, wiping her hands on a towel, "though you might want to reconsider your gambling habits." "It's Flint," the man said, his voice stronger than she would have expected. "Preston Flint." Rachel looked at him properly for the first time. Despite his pallor from blood loss, he was undeniably handsome, dark hair, strong jaw shadowed with stubble, and eyes the color of a stormy sky. She'd guess he was in his early 30s, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. "Well, Mr. Flint, you need rest and to keep that wound clean. I'll check on you tomorrow." "I appreciate your skills, Doc," he said, attempting to sit up before grimacing in pain. "Though I don't recall seeing you around these parts before." "I arrived last week," Rachel explained, beginning to pack up her supplies. "Dr. Holloway retired, and the town council was desperate enough to hire me." "Desperate," Sheriff Mills interjected, "more like blessed." Old Doc Holloway couldn't see well enough to tell a bullet wound from a tick bite these last few years. Preston Flint managed a weak smile. "Where are you staying, Doc?" "I've taken over Dr. Holloway's practice and his rooms above the apothecary," she replied, securing her bag. "Sheriff, can you help Mr. Flint to the Circle F?" Preston interrupted. "My ranch about 5 miles north of town, but I've got a room at the hotel for tonight." Sheriff Mills nodded. "I'll help him over there, Doc. You've done enough for one evening." Rachel stood, straightening her skirts. "I'll stop by in the morning to change that dressing, Mr. Flint." As she turned to leave, Preston caught her wrist, his touch surprisingly gentle despite his condition. "Thank you, Doc. Not many physicians would rush to a saloon at this hour to patch up a stranger." Rachel felt an unexpected warmth in her cheeks. "It's my job, Mr. Flint. Nothing more." But as she walked back to her rooms in the cool night air, Rachel couldn't help wondering about the wounded cowboy with the storm-gray eyes. True to her word, Rachel arrived at the Rock Springs Hotel the following morning. The establishment was the most impressive building in town, 3 stories of solid construction with actual glass windows, a luxury in these parts. The desk clerk directed her to room 7, and she knocked briskly. "Mr. Flint, it's Dr. Armstrong." A muffled groan answered her, followed by slow footsteps. The door opened to reveal Preston Flint, shirtless, with her bandage still in place but spotted with dried blood. His right arm hung carefully at his side. "Mornin', Doc," he said, his voice gruff with sleep. "Come on in." Rachel hesitated for only a moment before entering the sparse hotel room. A professional demeanor was essential in her line of work, especially when treating male patients. "I see you managed some rest. How's the pain?" "Had worse," Preston replied, easing himself onto the edge of the bed, "though I wouldn't turn down a drink if you're offering." "It's not yet 8 in the morning, Mr. Flint. I meant for the pain," he said with a wry smile. "But I suppose you've got something more appropriate in that bag of yours." Rachel set her medical bag on the nightstand and began removing supplies. "I do indeed. Now, let me see that wound." She worked silently, removing the old bandage, cleaning the injuries again, applying a fresh poultice of herbs and rebandaging his shoulder. Preston watched her intently, wincing occasionally but offering no complaints. "You've got steady hands, Doc," he observed. "Where'd you train?" "Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania," Rachel replied, securing the bandage. "I graduated 2 years ago. Long way from Philadelphia to Rock Springs." Rachel nodded. "I wanted to go where I could make a difference. Not many doctors are willing to practice out here." "And no family to keep you back east," she stiffened slightly. "My parents passed away when I was 19. Influenza. I have an aunt in Boston, but we're not close." Preston's expression softened. "Sorry to hear that. Losing family is never easy." There was something in his tone that made Rachel look up. Behind the casual words lay a depth of understanding that suggested personal experience with loss. "What about you, Mr. Flint?" she asked, packing up her supplies. "You mentioned the Circle F Ranch." "Been mine for 8 years now," he said with a hint of pride. "Started with just 50 acres and a dozen cattle. Now it's one of the largest spreads in the territory." "Impressive," Rachel remarked. "Will someone from your ranch be coming to help you back?" A shadow crossed Preston's face. "My foreman, Sam, will be by with a wagon this afternoon. I've got good men working for me." Rachel nodded, sensing there was more to the story but respecting his privacy. "The wound looks clean, but you'll need to take it easy for at least a week." "No riding, no roping, nothing that could tear those stitches." Preston groaned. "A week of sitting around while my men do all the work. That's worse than getting shot." "Would you prefer gangrene and losing your arm entirely?" Rachel asked, arching an eyebrow. "Or perhaps bleeding to death would be more convenient for your schedule." To her surprise, Preston laughed, a rich, genuine sound that transformed his face. "You don't mince words, do you, Doc?" "I find honesty saves time, Mr. Flint," she replied, closing her bag. "I'll check on you again tomorrow if you're still in town." Preston stood carefully, reaching for his shirt with his good arm. "I appreciate that, and please call me Preston. Mr. Flint makes me sound like my father." Rachel paused at the door. "Very well, Preston, and you may call me Dr. Armstrong." His laughter followed her down the hallway. Over the next week, Rachel found herself treating Preston Flint's wound daily, either at the hotel or after he returned to his ranch during his visits to town. Despite her professional demeanor, she couldn't deny a growing interest in the rancher. He was intelligent, well-spoken for a man who spent most of his life on horseback, and possessed a dry humor that often caught her by surprise. On her 8th day in Rock Springs, Rachel was organizing supplies in her small office when Mrs. Peterson, the apothecary owner's wife, poked her head in. "Dr. Armstrong, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's not medical." Rachel frowned. Did he give a name, Mr. Flint, Mrs. Peterson replied with a knowing smile. And he's brought flowers. Confused, Rachel followed Mrs. Peterson to the front of the shop. There stood Preston, looking considerably healthier than when she'd first met him, holding a modest bouquet of wildflowers. "Good afternoon, Doc," he said, removing his hat. "Thought I'd stop by to show you I'm following orders. No riding, no roping, just directing my men from the porch like a proper invalid." Rachel accepted the flowers with surprise. "These are lovely, thank you. But surely you didn't ride into town just to show me you're behaving." "I had business at the bank," he replied, then grinned. "And I thought perhaps I might convince you to join me for dinner at the hotel restaurant, as a thank you for saving my arm, maybe my life." Rachel hesitated. In Philadelphia, she'd been careful to maintain strict boundaries with patients, but the social rules of the frontier were different. Still, her reputation as the town's only physician was precarious enough without adding gossip. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Flint, Preston," he corrected. "Preston," she amended, "but I'm not sure it would be appropriate." "It's just dinner, Doc," he said easily. "In a public place with plenty of witnesses to ensure your reputation remains untarnished. Consider it a chance to make sure I'm not overdoing things." Put that way, it was hard to refuse. "Very well. What time?" "6 o'clock. I'll wait for you in the lobby." The dinner proved surprisingly pleasant. Preston was a natural conversationalist, sharing stories of building his ranch from nothing after arriving in Wyoming with little more than determination, and the skills he'd learned working cattle drives in Texas. "What made you choose Wyoming?" Rachel asked, enjoying a slice of apple pie. Preston's expression grew distant. "Needed a fresh start. After the war, Texas had too many memories." "You fought in the Civil War," he nodded, absently rubbing his left forearm where Rachel had noticed a long scar during his treatment. "Joined up in '61, though I was barely 18. Spent 4 years watching good men die for a cause I wasn't sure I believed in anymore by the end." Rachel studied him with new understanding. "That explains your tolerance for pain, and your comment about having had worse injuries." "Took a Yankee bullet at Gettysburg," he confirmed. "But that was a lifetime ago. And after the war, you became a rancher, spent 5 years on the cattle trails first, saved every penny, then came north in '70 and staked my claim." Pride briefly replaced the shadows in his eyes. "Best decision I ever made." As the evening progressed, Rachel found herself sharing more than she'd intended: her struggles at medical college, the initial resistance from male physicians, her dreams of establishing a proper clinic in Rock Springs. "Town's growing," Preston noted. "Railroads bringing more people every month. A good hospital would be welcome." "Perhaps someday," Rachel said. "For now, I'm focused on earning the community's trust." When they parted that evening, Preston took her hand and kissed it lightly, a surprisingly genteel gesture from a frontier cattleman. "Thank you for a pleasant evening, Dr. Armstrong, Rachel," she found herself saying. "When we're not in a professional capacity, you may call me Rachel." His slow smile made something flutter in her chest. "Rachel, I like that." Over the next few weeks, Preston's shoulder healed well, and his visits to town and to Rachel became more frequent. Sometimes he brought small gifts: a jar of honey from wild bees on his property, a book of poetry he'd ordered from Denver, once even a delicate silver hairpin he claimed had caught his eye in the general store window. Rachel found herself looking forward to these visits, even as she tried to maintain a professional distance. Preston never pressed for more than friendly conversation and the occasional meal together, but she sensed a deepening interest in his attentions. What she didn't expect was the town's reaction. Mrs. Peterson wasn't the only one who noticed Preston's frequent appearances at the apothecary, and soon Rachel found herself the subject of curious glances and knowing smiles. "I hear Mr. Flint's taking an interest in our new doctor," observed Mrs. Wilcox during her appointment for chronic rheumatism. "He's quite a catch, you know. Richest rancher in the county and still a bachelor at his age." "Mr. Flint is simply a grateful patient," Rachel replied firmly, applying liniment to the woman's swollen joints. Mrs. Wilcox sniffed doubtfully. "If you say so, dear, though it's a shame if that's all it is. Man like that needs a wife, especially after what happened." Rachel tried to maintain her professional demeanor, but curiosity got the better of her. "What do you mean, after what happened?" The older woman looked surprised. "He hasn't told you about Caroline." "I don't discuss personal matters with my patients, Mrs. Wilcox," Rachel said, though her heart had begun to beat faster. "Well, I'm not one for gossip," Mrs. Wilcox began, clearly preparing to do exactly that. "But everyone knows the story. Preston Flint was engaged once, about 5 years back, to Caroline Becker, the schoolteacher. Pretty little thing, but fragile. She took ill with pneumonia one winter. Preston rode through a blizzard trying to get the doctor from the next town, but she shook her head sadly. By the time they returned, she was gone." Rachel felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. How terrible. "He took it hard," Mrs. Wilcox continued. "Threw himself into building that ranch, never looked at another woman seriously since. Some folks thought he'd never marry after that. That's why seeing him call on you has set tongues wagging." That evening, alone in her rooms, Rachel found herself thinking about Preston in a new light. His loss explained the shadows she sometimes glimpsed behind his smile, the way he seemed to hold part of himself in reserve even during their most pleasant conversations. It also made her uncomfortably aware of her own growing feelings. Was she merely a diversion for a lonely man? Or worse, was he unconsciously seeking a replacement for his lost love? Rachel had come to Rock Springs to establish herself as a physician, not to lose her heart to a rancher with ghosts in his past. She resolved to create more distance between them, a resolution that lasted precisely 3 days, until Preston appeared at her door with a patient. "What happened?" Rachel demanded, directing Preston and his ranch hand to lay the injured man on her examination table. "Miguel fell from the hayloft," Preston explained, his face taut with concern. "Hit his head hard. He was unconscious for a few minutes and he's been confused since waking." Rachel immediately set to examining the young Mexican man, checking his pupils, feeling for fractures, and asking him simple questions in the Spanish she'd learned during her hospital training. "Probable concussion," she determined. "No obvious skull fracture, but he needs to be watched closely for the next day or two. Any worsening confusion, vomiting, or uneven pupils, and you bring him straight back." Preston nodded gravely. "I'll have someone with him around the clock." "He should stay here," Rachel decided. "I can monitor him better, and the trip back to your ranch might worsen his condition." "I'll stay too, then," Preston said. "Miguel's family is in El Paso. He's my responsibility." Rachel didn't argue. They established Miguel in the small room behind her office that she sometimes used for patients needing overnight observation. Preston insisted on taking the uncomfortable chair beside the bed for the first watch. As the night deepened, Rachel checked on them periodically. Around midnight, she found Miguel sleeping peacefully while Preston sat vigilant, fatigue evident in the lines of his face. "You need rest too," Rachel said softly. "I can watch him for a while." Preston shook his head. "I'm fine. You've already done enough." Rachel brought him coffee and sat in the second chair. "Tell me about him." "Miguel, best horse trainer I've ever known. Been with me 3 years now." Preston's affection for his employee was evident. Sends half his wages home to his mother and sisters. You care about your men, Rachel observed. Preston looked at her directly. A ranch isn't just land and cattle, Doc. It's people. The men who work for me are like family. The simple statement revealed more about Preston Flint than all their previous conversations combined. Here was a man who had lost much family in the war, his fiancée to illness, and had built himself a new family of sorts. I heard about Caroline, Rachel said quietly, not entirely sure why she was broaching the subject. Mrs. Wilcox mentioned her. Preston's face tightened briefly before he exhaled slowly. I figured someone would. Small towns don't let you keep many secrets. I'm sorry for your loss. He was silent for so long that Rachel thought he might not respond. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and controlled. Caroline was gentle, kind, too good for this harsh country probably. We were going to marry in the spring. He looked down at his hands. I was in Cheyenne buying breeding stock when she fell ill. By the time I got word and made it back, pneumonia had set in badly. The closest doctor was in Rawlins, 40 miles away. I rode through the worst blizzard I'd ever seen trying to bring him back in time. He fell silent again, lost in memory. It wasn't your fault, Rachel said gently. Preston's laugh was hollow. That's what everyone said. Didn't make it any easier to believe. For a long time I thought I'd never. He shook his head. Well, it doesn't matter now. But it did matter, Rachel realized. It mattered very much to understand what she might be involving herself in with this man who carried such deep wounds. Is that why you've shown such interest in my work? She asked carefully. Because Rock Springs lacked a doctor when you needed one. The question seemed to surprise him. Maybe at first, he admitted. When I heard the town had hired a new physician, I was relieved. But then I met you. He stopped abruptly, as if he'd said more than he intended. And, Rachel prompted, Preston met her eyes directly. And I found myself thinking about more than just having a doctor nearby. The confession hung between them, neither willing to be the first to acknowledge its implications. Finally, Rachel stood, professional instincts reasserting themselves. I should check Miguel's pupils again, she said, moving to the patient's bedside. And you really should get some rest, Preston. I can wake you if there's any change. He didn't argue this time, settling back in his chair and closing his eyes while Rachel tended to her patient. But as she left the room, she felt his gaze following her, and the weight of unspoken possibilities remained. Miguel recovered quickly, and within 2 days was well enough to return to the Circle F with Preston. Life in Rock Springs resumed its normal pace for Rachel, with a steady stream of patients keeping her busy from dawn until dusk. Preston continued to visit town regularly, always finding a reason to stop by her office, though their conversations remained light and carefully casual after that night of near confessions. As June bloomed into July, bringing scorching heat to the high plains, Rachel found herself increasingly restless. Her practice was thriving, with even the most skeptical townspeople now accepting her skills, but something was missing. She found herself looking forward to Preston's visits with an eagerness that both thrilled and alarmed her. One sweltering afternoon, as Rachel was treating young Tommy Wilson for a broken arm earned by falling from a tree, Preston appeared at her office door with an unexpected proposal. The 4th of July celebration is next week, he said once Tommy and his mother had departed. The whole county turns out for it: picnic, dancing, fireworks shipped in special from Denver. Rachel wiped her hands on a towel. Mrs. Peterson mentioned it. Sounds festive. I was hoping you'd accompany me, Preston said, unusually formal. As my guest. The invitation was significant. Attending such a public celebration together would make a clear statement to the town about their relationship, whatever it might be. Preston, Rachel began hesitantly. I'm not sure if, before you answer, he interrupted, I'd like to show you something. Can you spare an afternoon, say tomorrow? Curiosity overcame caution. I suppose I could arrange it. What did you have in mind? Wear something suitable for riding, was all he would say. I'll pick you up at noon. The following day dawned bright and clear. Rachel dressed in her practical split riding skirt and a light blouse, wondering what Preston had planned. He arrived precisely at noon with 2 horses, his own chestnut gelding and a gentle-looking bay mare. Hope you don't mind riding astride, he said, helping her mount. Where we're going, a side saddle wouldn't be practical. They rode north out of town, following the meandering course of Bitter Creek. Preston was uncharacteristically quiet, responding to Rachel's questions with brief answers that revealed little about their destination. After an hour's ride, they began climbing a gentle slope that eventually opened onto a plateau, offering a spectacular view of the surrounding countryside. In the distance, the Wind River Mountains rose majestically against the brilliant blue sky. It's beautiful, Rachel breathed, taking in the panorama. Preston dismounted and helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. This is Circle F land, he said, gesturing to the expanse before them. All the way to that ridge line to the west and down to the creek we followed. He led her to a spot near the edge of the plateau where a single cottonwood tree provided welcome shade. Beneath it sat a wooden marker, a simple cross weathered by years of sun and wind. Caroline, Rachel asked softly. Preston nodded. This was her favorite place. She said you could see forever from here. He knelt briefly by the grave, touching the wooden cross with gentle fingers before rising. I come here sometimes to think. Thank you for sharing this with me, Rachel said, understanding the significance of the gesture. It's a peaceful place. That's not all I wanted to show you, Preston said, taking her hand and leading her away from the grave, back toward a flat area where a natural spring created a small oasis of green. This is what I wanted you to see. In the clearing stood the beginnings of a structure, foundation stones laid out in a generous rectangle, with several walls partially framed. What is it? Rachel asked, though she could guess from the size and shape. My new house, Preston replied, watching her reaction carefully. The ranch house I have now was fine for a bachelor and a few hands, but I've been thinking it's time for something more substantial. Rachel walked around the perimeter of the foundation, noting the care with which it had been planned. It will be impressive when finished. How many rooms? 8, plus a large kitchen and dining room, Preston said, following her. And this, he indicated a space near the front of the layout, would make a fine doctor's office. Private entrance, southern exposure for good light. Rachel stopped abruptly, turning to face him. A doctor's office. Preston stepped closer, taking both her hands in his. Rachel, I didn't bring you here just to show you my building plans. I brought you here because... He took a deep breath. Because I never thought I'd feel this way again after Caroline died. I closed that part of myself off, convinced that loving someone meant eventually losing them. Rachel's heart began to race as she realized where this conversation was heading. Then you arrived in Rock Springs, Preston continued, his voice growing more certain. First, you saved my life, or at least my arm. Then, without even trying, you started to heal something else in me. Something I thought was broken beyond repair. Preston, Rachel whispered, unsure what else to say. I know it hasn't been long, he acknowledged. And I know you came here to be a doctor, not a rancher's wife. But I'm asking you to consider a future where you could be both. He gestured to the half-built house. This could be our home. You could still practice medicine. I'd never ask you to give that up. The ranch is close enough to town that people could come to you, or you could go to them when needed. The offer was breathtaking in its generosity and understanding. Unlike many men who would expect a wife to abandon her profession, Preston was proposing a partnership that honored her calling. "I don't know what to say," Rachel admitted. "This is unexpected." "You don't have to answer now," Preston assured her, though she could see hope and anxiety warring in his eyes. "Come to the 4th celebration with me. Get to know the ranch, the men who work for me. Take time to think about whether I could be enough for you." Rachel looked around at the sweeping vistas, the foundation of what could be her future home, and finally at the man standing before her strong, honorable, and offering her his heart despite having had it broken before. "Yes," she said, making her decision. "I'll come to the celebration with you, and I'll think about everything else." The relief and joy that transformed Preston's face made her breath catch. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her palm, a gesture so intimate it sent warmth spreading through her entire body. "That's all I can ask for now," he said. They spent another hour exploring the plateau, with Preston pointing out landmarks and sharing his vision for the ranch's future. As they prepared to return to town, Rachel cast one last glance at Caroline's grave, feeling not jealousy but a strange sense of connection to the woman who had first loved this good man. The 4th of July dawned hot and cloudless. Rachel dressed with unusual care in her best dress, a deep blue cotton with white trim that she'd brought from Philadelphia. Mrs. Peterson had helped her style her hair in a fashionable arrangement, secured with the silver hairpin Preston had given her. Preston arrived at precisely 10 o'clock, driving a handsome buggy pulled by matched bays. He had dressed for the occasion as well, trading his usual practical rancher's attire for a crisp white shirt, dark vest, and polished boots. "You look beautiful," he said simply, helping her into the buggy. The celebration was being held in a meadow just outside town, and it seemed the entire county had indeed turned out for the event. Long tables groaned under the weight of food brought by local families. Children raced about playing games, and a small band of musicians tuned their instruments on an improvised platform. As they made their way through the crowd, Rachel quickly realized that her presence at Preston's side was causing quite a stir. Women whispered behind their hands, men slapped Preston on the back with knowing grins, and more than one person made pointed references to hearing wedding bells soon. Rather than being embarrassed, Preston seemed pleased by the attention, proudly introducing Rachel to those she hadn't yet met professionally. By mid-afternoon, she had spoken with what felt like half the county and found herself welcomed with genuine warmth. "Miss Rachel," called a familiar voice, and she turned to see Miguel approaching, his hat in his hands. "You look my Benita very beautiful." "Thank you, Miguel," she replied warmly. "How's that hard head of yours?" he laughed, touching the faded scar at his hairline. "Strong as ever thanks to you." "The boss, he say you might come to live at Circle F someday. Is true?" Rachel felt herself blush, aware of Preston watching this exchange with amusement. "Nothing's decided yet." Miguel nodded seriously. "We all hope you say yes. Boss is happier since he meet you. And we need a doctor close by. Jose is always hurting himself." As the afternoon progressed into evening, lanterns were lit around the meadow, and the band struck up dance tunes. Preston led Rachel into a lively Virginia reel, then a slower waltz that brought them close together. "What do you think?" he asked quietly as they moved in perfect synchrony. "About the people, I mean." "They're good people," Rachel answered honestly. "Different from what I'm used to in the East, but genuine. And the ranch, what you saw yesterday," Rachel smiled up at him. "It's magnificent land, Preston. You've built something remarkable." His arm tightened slightly around her waist. "And me, Rachel? What do you think about me?" The directness of the question took her breath away. Around them, other couples continued dancing, but in that moment, they might as well have been alone under the vast Wyoming sky. "I think," she said carefully, "that I've never met anyone like you, and that frightens me a little." "Frightens you?" His brow furrowed with concern. "I came here with such clear plans to establish myself as a physician, to build a practice, perhaps someday a proper clinic. I never expected." She trailed off, unable to articulate the tumult of emotions he stirred in her. "You never expected a bullet-riddled rancher to complicate things," Preston suggested, a smile tugging at his lips. Rachel laughed softly. "Something like that." The music ended, but neither moved to break apart. In the gathering dusk, with lanterns casting a golden glow over the festivities, Preston's gaze held hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "I'm falling in love with you, Rachel Armstrong," he said, his voice low and certain. "I don't expect you to say it back yet, but I wanted you to know." Before she could respond, the first of the fireworks exploded overhead, drawing gasps and applause from the crowd. Preston led her to a blanket spread on a small rise where they could watch the display. As rockets burst in brilliant patterns against the night sky, Rachel found herself leaning against Preston's solid warmth, his arm around her shoulders, thinking not about the spectacle above but about the future unfurling before her, unexpected, frightening, and filled with possibilities she'd never dared imagine. In the days following the celebration, Rachel found herself at a crossroads. Her practice continued to flourish, with patients arriving not just from Rock Springs but from surrounding settlements as well. The town council had even approached her about establishing a proper clinic, offering financial support and a suitable building. At the same time, Preston's invitation to share his life at the Circle F exerted a powerful pull. He courted her with a patient determination that she found increasingly difficult to resist. Their rides became a Sunday tradition, sometimes to the plateau where his new house continued to take shape, sometimes exploring other beautiful corners of his vast property. "The clinic in town and your practice at the ranch needn't be mutually exclusive," Preston argued during one such ride in late July. "You could divide your time between them, the best of both worlds." "And where would I live?" Rachel asked. "I can hardly stay at the ranch without being my wife," Preston finished. "I know. That's why I'm asking you to marry me, Rachel." Though she'd sensed the question was coming, hearing it spoken aloud still took her breath away. They had stopped their horses by a bubbling creek, dismounting to let the animals drink. Now Preston stood before her, holding both her hands, his expression earnest and vulnerable. "I've thought about this carefully," he continued when she didn't immediately respond. "I know it hasn't been long, barely 2 months since you fished that bullet out of me at the Golden Spur, but I also know what I feel. After Caroline died, I never thought I'd love again, never wanted to risk that kind of pain, but you." He squeezed her hands gently. "You make me want to risk everything." "Preston," Rachel began, her voice unsteady, "I care for you deeply, but marriage is such a serious commitment." "It is," he agreed, "and I wouldn't ask if I wasn't absolutely certain, but I am certain, Rachel, about you, about us." She looked up at him, this man who had somehow worked his way past all her careful defenses. "I need a little more time," she said finally. "Not because I don't care for you, but because this decision affects everything: my practice, my independence, my future." Disappointment flickered in his eyes, but he nodded. "I understand. Take whatever time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." He kissed her then, a gentle, respectful kiss that nonetheless conveyed the depth of his feelings. When they parted, Rachel found herself wondering why she was hesitating when her heart already seemed to have made its choice. The answer came unexpectedly 2 days later when a letter arrived from Philadelphia. "Doctor, Elizabeth Blackwell, the pioneering female physician who had been Rachel's mentor, wrote with an extraordinary offer: a position at the new Women's Medical College Hospital, working alongside the country's finest female doctors and training the next generation of women in medicine. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, exactly what Rachel had worked toward through years of study and struggle. Yet as she sat in her small office reading the letter, she felt not excitement but a profound sense of conflict. That evening, she walked to the edge of town, finding a quiet spot overlooking Bitter Creek where she could think. The sun was setting, painting the Wyoming sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple. In the distance, she could see the dark silhouette of the Wind River Mountains, wild, beautiful, and so different from the ordered cityscape of Philadelphia. "Thought I might find you here," came a familiar voice. Rachel turned to see Preston approaching, leading his horse. "How did you know?" He shrugged, dropping the reins to let his mount graze nearby and settling beside her on a flat rock. "You mentioned liking the view from here once, and Mrs. Peterson mentioned you seemed troubled when you passed the apothecary earlier." "News travels fast," Rachel observed wryly. "Small town," Preston replied with a smile that faded as he studied her face. "What's wrong, Rachel?" She handed him the letter without comment, watching as he read it carefully, his expression growing more serious with each line. "This is quite an honor," he said finally, returning the letter. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Rachel said, surprised by his calm reaction. "When would you need to leave?" His voice was carefully neutral. "They want an answer within the month. If I accept, I'd start in September." Preston was silent for a long moment, gazing at the darkening landscape. Finally, he turned to her, his eyes reflecting the last light of sunset. "I won't pretend this doesn't change things," he said quietly. "But my feelings for you haven't changed, Rachel. If Philadelphia is where your future lies, I'll respect that. I'd never ask you to give up something this important." His selflessness only made her decision more difficult. "I've worked so hard for an opportunity like this," she said, her voice catching. "To practice medicine at the highest level, to teach, to help advance women in the profession." "I know," Preston said, taking her hand. "It's part of why I admire you so much. But then I think about leaving Rock Springs, leaving the people here who have come to trust me." "Leaving you," she didn't add, though the words hung unspoken between them. "Whatever you decide," Preston said, "I want you to know these past months have been a gift I never expected. You brought something back to life in me, Rachel, something I thought was gone forever." Tears pricked at her eyes. "You've given me something precious too, Preston. A sense of belonging I never found in Philadelphia, despite all my years there." As darkness fell around them, they sat in companionable silence, hands linked, each lost in private thoughts about the future and the difficult choices that lay ahead. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity as Rachel threw herself into her work, seeing patients from dawn until dusk, as if trying to serve everyone in the county before making her decision. Preston kept his distance, making no attempt to influence her choice, though she felt his absence keenly. On the Sunday before she needed to post her response to Philadelphia, Rachel rode alone to the plateau where Preston's new house now stood nearly complete. The main structure was finished, the roof in place, and only interior work remained. Walking through the empty rooms, Rachel could envision how it would look furnished a comfortable home, and, in the front rooms he designated for her practice, a modern medical office with large windows and custom-built cabinets for her equipment and medicines. She paused in what would be the main bedroom, gazing out the window at the spectacular view. A lifetime in Philadelphia would mean giving up these vistas, this clean air, the sense of limitless possibility that the western landscape inspired. More importantly, it would mean giving up Preston, a man who loved her enough to let her go if that was what she truly wanted. I thought I might find you here. Rachel turned to see Preston standing in the doorway, his expression carefully guarded. The house is beautiful, she said. You've made remarkable progress. The men have worked hard, he acknowledged, stepping into the room. I wanted it finished before winter. Preston, Rachel began, but he held up a hand. Before you say anything, I want you to know I've been doing some thinking of my own these past weeks. He moved to stand beside her at the window. I realized I've been unfair, asking you to choose between your career and a life here with me. That's not the kind of partnership I want. Rachel studied his face, trying to understand where this was leading. What are you saying? I'm saying that if Philadelphia is where you need to be, then I'll sell the Circle F and go with you. The offer stunned her. You'd leave everything you've built here. Your ranch, your men, this house. Preston nodded, his gaze steady. For you, yes. I lost one love to circumstances beyond my control. I won't lose another without doing everything in my power to make it work. The depth of his commitment left Rachel speechless. This man, who had rebuilt his life from the ashes of war and personal tragedy, who had created a thriving ranch through years of backbreaking work, was willing to sacrifice it all for her happiness. In that moment, with sunlight streaming through the window of what could be their bedroom, Rachel finally acknowledged the truth her heart had known for weeks. I'm not going to Philadelphia, she said quietly. Preston went very still. Rachel, I don't want you to refuse this opportunity because you feel obligated. It's not obligation, she interrupted. It's choice. My choice. She stepped closer to him, placing her hands on his chest. I came west because I wanted my work to matter, to make a real difference in people's lives. I found that here in Rock Springs and at the Circle F. More importantly, I've found you. Hope dawned in Preston's eyes. Are you certain? I need you to be certain, Rachel. I am, she said, and realized it was true. Doctor. Blackwell offered me a prestigious position, but what you're offering me is a full life, a medical practice, a community that needs me, and a partner who respects my calling. She smiled up at him. Besides, I've grown rather fond of Wyoming. The East seems terribly cramped by comparison. With a sound that was half laugh, half sob, Preston pulled her into his arms, holding her as if he might never let go. When he finally eased back to look at her, his eyes were suspiciously bright. Does this mean you're accepting my proposal? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Rachel nodded, happiness bubbling up inside her like a spring. Yes, Preston Flint, I will marry you. His kiss was tender at first, then deepened with a passion that left them both breathless. When they finally parted, Preston rested his forehead against hers. When? He asked simply. As soon as this house is finished, Rachel decided. I want to start our life together here, in the home you've built for us. Preston's smile was radiant. 2 weeks then, the men and I will have it ready. True to his word, Preston and his ranch hands worked tirelessly to complete the house. Rachel divided her time between her practice in town and helping to furnish their new home, ordering linens and kitchenware from the general store, and supervising the installation of her medical equipment in the rooms designated for her practice. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Rock Springs and the surrounding area. Rachel was touched by the community's enthusiastic response. Gifts appeared daily at her office, and patients offered heartfelt congratulations. Even Mrs. Wilcox, the town's most notorious gossip, expressed approval. Knew it from the start, she declared during her monthly appointment. The way that man looked at you, like a man seeing the sun after years of darkness. Mark my words, you'll be good for each other. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in September. Though Rachel had initially envisioned a small, private ceremony, It soon became apparent that the entire county expected to celebrate with them. Preston seemed delighted by the prospect of a large gathering, so Rachel embraced it as well, touched by the community's investment in their happiness. On the morning of their wedding day, Rachel woke in her rooms above the apothecary for the last time. Outside, the air held the first crisp hint of autumn, though the sun promised a beautiful day. Mrs. Peterson and several other ladies from town arrived to help her prepare, bringing flowers for her hair and a small package. "From Preston, Mrs. Peterson explained, handing Rachel the carefully wrapped parcel. "He said you should open it before the ceremony." Inside, nestled on a bed of cotton, lay a delicate gold locket. When Rachel opened it, she found a small scrap of paper bearing Preston's bold handwriting. "To my doctor, my partner, my love P." Tears threatened to ruin the careful application of powder Mrs. Peterson had just completed. Rachel blinked them back and fastened the locket around her neck, where it rested perfectly above the neckline of her wedding dress, a creation of ivory silk that had arrived from Denver just 3 days earlier. The ceremony was held on the plateau near the new house, with the Wind River Mountains providing a majestic backdrop. It seemed everyone in Rock Springs and half the surrounding territory had made the journey to witness the event. Rachel was overwhelmed by the sea of familiar faces as Sheriff Mills escorted her to where Preston waited beside the minister. Preston's face as he watched her approach was a study in wonder and love. He stood tall and handsome in a new black suit, his usually unruly hair neatly combed, his eyes never leaving hers as she made her way to his side. The minister's words were traditional, but when it came time for the vows, Preston surprised her by speaking from the heart rather than repeating the standard phrases. "Rachel Armstrong," he began, his voice strong and clear. "5 years ago, I buried my heart on this plateau, convinced I would never love again. Then you arrived in Rock Springs and saved more than just my shoulder that night at the Golden Spur. You saved me from a half-life of work without joy, of existence without hope." He took her hands in his. "I promise to cherish you every day, to support your calling as a physician, to build a life worthy of your courage and compassion. I promise to be your partner in all things, your comfort in sorrow, your companion in joy, and your devoted husband until my last breath." Moved beyond words, Rachel struggled to compose herself before offering her own vows. "Preston Flint, when I came west, I was seeking purpose, not love. Yet in you, I found both. You've shown me that it's possible to honor my calling while opening my heart. I promise to be your wife, your partner, your doctor when needed." This drew appreciative laughter from the gathering, "and your most loyal friend. I promise to face whatever challenges come our way with the same courage you've shown in rebuilding your life, and to love you faithfully all the days of our life together." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Preston cupped Rachel's face in his hands with infinite tenderness before kissing her. The assembled guests erupted in cheers and applause that echoed across the plateau. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with tables set up near the new house, musicians playing lively tunes, and enough food to feed an army. As darkness fell, lanterns illuminated the festivities, and Rachel found herself constantly aware of Preston at her side, his hand seeking hers, his smile reflecting the happiness she felt. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Preston led Rachel away from the crowd, toward their new home. "I want to show you something," he said, guiding her through the front door and into the main room where a fire burned welcomingly in the stone fireplace. "It's a wedding gift." He led her to a door she hadn't noticed before, hidden in the paneling of the hallway. When he opened it, Rachel gasped in surprise. A small room had been outfitted as a private study, with bookshelves already filled with medical texts, a handsome desk, and a comfortable reading chair. "Your sanctuary," Preston explained, "for when you need quiet to read or write or just think. Every doctor needs a place to reflect, you once told me." Touched beyond words, Rachel turned to embrace him. "It's perfect, thank you." "There's one more thing," Preston said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small silver key and placed it in her palm. "The key to your medical cabinets. I had them custom-made with locks to secure your medicines and instruments. I want you to know your practice is entirely yours to manage as you see fit. I may be your husband, but I'll never presume to control your work." Such consideration was rare among husbands, Rachel knew. The gesture perfectly encapsulated why she had fallen in love with this remarkable man. "Mrs. Flint," Preston murmured, drawing her close. "My wife." "My husband," Rachel replied, savoring the newness of the words. "Shall we bid our guests good night? It seems to me we have more private matters to attend to." Preston's slow smile made her heart race. "I believe you're right, Doctor. Most definitely right." Later, as moonlight filtered through the bedroom window of their new home, Preston traced gentle patterns on Rachel's bare shoulder. "Happy?" he asked softly. "Completely," she assured him, nestling closer to his warmth. "Though I was thinking about something Mrs. Wilcox said," Preston chuckled. "Should I be concerned? That woman's tongue is sharper than your surgical instruments. She said you looked at me like a man seeing the sun after years of darkness," Rachel said, propping herself up on one elbow to gaze at him. "Is that true?" In the silvery moonlight, Preston's expression grew serious. "More true than she could know. After Caroline died, I convinced myself that loving someone meant inevitable pain, better to avoid it entirely." He brushed a strand of hair from Rachel's face. "Then you stormed into the Golden Spur, all competence and compassion, ordering everyone about while you saved my life. And something in me recognized you not just as a gifted physician, but as the woman who could make me whole again." "I felt it too," Rachel admitted, "though I fought against it. I was so determined to focus only on my practice. And now," Preston's hand settled warm against her waist, "now I understand that love doesn't diminish me or my work, it enriches everything." She leaned down to kiss him softly. "You've given me more than a home, Preston. You've given me a future I never dared imagine." "We've only just begun," he promised, drawing her back into his embrace. "The best is yet to come, wife." "I'll hold you to that, husband," Rachel whispered as his lips found hers once more. 10 years later, Rachel stood on the porch of their home, watching as Preston taught their 8-year-old son, William, how to properly saddle a horse. Beside her, 4-year-old Elizabeth clutched her doll, dark curls bouncing as she bounced impatiently. "Can I ride too, Mama?" the little girl asked, her gray eyes so like her father's wide with hope. "When you're a bit taller," Rachel promised, smoothing her daughter's hair. "For now, you can ride with Papa or your brother." From the corner of her eye, Rachel caught movement along the road leading to their ranch, a wagon approaching at speed. Shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun, she recognized Sheriff Mills driving with unusual haste. "Preston," she called, already turning to enter the house. "Company coming, looks urgent." By the time the sheriff pulled up to the hitching post, Rachel had her medical bag ready. Preston was already striding to meet the wagon, William trailing curiously behind. "Doc Flint," Sheriff Mills greeted Rachel as she emerged from the house. "Got a bad one." Stagecoach overturned on the canyon road. Driver's dead, but there's a family hurt pretty bad. I've got the woman and child here. Man's being brought to town by some travelers who came upon the wreck." Rachel nodded briskly, her physician's instincts taking over as she moved to the back of the wagon. A woman lay pale and still on blankets, a gash visible on her forehead. Beside her, a boy of about 10 clutched his obviously broken arm, his face streaked with tears and dirt. "Let's get them inside," Rachel directed. "William, run tell Miguel we need hot water and clean linens. Elizabeth, go to your room for now." Preston carefully lifted the unconscious woman while Sheriff Mills helped the boy down. Within minutes, the injured passengers were settled in the front rooms that had served as Rachel's clinic for the past decade. Hours later, with both patients stabilized, the woman suffering a concussion, but expected to recover, the boy's arm set and splinted, Rachel finally stepped out onto the porch for a breath of fresh air. Preston joined her, handing her a cup of coffee. "You're remarkable," he said, his admiration evident even after years of watching her work. "That boy was terrified until you started talking to him about fishing, of all things." Rachel smiled tiredly. "Distraction is powerful medicine. How are our children?" "Fed, bathed, and sleeping," Preston reported. "Though William extracted a promise that I'd tell him everything about the accident tomorrow." "Like father, like son," Rachel observed fondly, always wanting the full story. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky. After a moment, Preston slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her against his side. 10 years, he said quietly. "Hard to believe sometimes. Having regrets, Mr. Flint?" Rachel teased, knowing the answer. "Only that I wasted so much time being afraid to love again," he replied, turning to face her. "These have been the best years of my life, Rachel. The ranch, the children, the clinic you've built, everything beyond what I dared hope for." Inside, the Circle F had indeed flourished under their partnership. Preston had expanded his holdings and improved his breeding stock, while Rachel had established a reputation that drew patients from 3 counties. The small clinic in town still operated 2 days a week, staffed by Rachel and now a young assistant she was training, while the ranch practice served the more distant homesteads and, increasingly, the growing number of settlers pushing westward. Their children were the greatest joy. William, with his serious nature and love of books, so like Rachel in temperament. Elizabeth, with her fearless spirit and uncanny ability to charm everyone she met, much like her father. "I was thinking," Preston said, breaking into her reflections, "about that letter from Philadelphia." Rachel looked up in surprise. "After all this time, what made you think of that? Something the sheriff mentioned while you were working on the boy's arm." "Said the new medical college in Denver is looking for experienced physicians to lecture occasionally." Preston's expression was thoughtful. "Might be an opportunity for you to share some of that knowledge you've accumulated." The suggestion touched Rachel deeply. After all these years, Preston still sought ways to support her professional growth, even as they built their life together. It was this unwavering respect as much as his love that had made their marriage so strong. "I might consider it," she mused, "though only if you'd accompany me. I seem to recall you're quite persuasive in Denver. Something about finding the perfect wedding dress with just a few telegrams and a rather substantial bank draft." Preston laughed, pulling her closer. "One of my better negotiations, if I do say so myself. You were a vision that day." "As I recall," Rachel said, slipping her arms around his neck, "you made your appreciation quite clear that night." His eyes darkened with remembered passion and present desire. "Did I? Perhaps I should refresh your memory, Mrs. Flint." "Perhaps you should," she agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. As they made their way back into the house, their home, built with love and filled with the life they'd created together, Rachel silently blessed the twist of fate that had brought a wounded cowboy into her surgery that night 10 years ago. The man who had sworn never to love again had proved all the gossips wrong the night he'd called her wife, and every day since, as they built a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone. And in the quiet of their bedroom, with the sounds of the Wyoming night drifting through the open window, Preston Flint once again demonstrated that his heart, once thought beyond healing, now belonged completely and eternally to the doctor who had saved not just his life, but his capacity to love. "My Rachel," he whispered against her skin, "my heart, my wife." And Rachel, secure in the knowledge that she had made the right choice all those years ago, surrendered to the enduring passion of the man who had taught her that loving deeply didn't diminish her strength, but multiplied it, the lesson that had transformed both their lives on the wild Wyoming frontier.